Hi, everybody. I'm Ezra, like Arden said. I worked at CapU for 2 years as an inclusion facilitator before recently moving in to the community organizer role, which focuses on building community and supporting alumni. But previously to that, I worked as the inclusion facilitator at CapU, and I was lucky to meet so many great people and make so many allies who've really moved inclusion into the place of value at CapU. So I'm excited to introduce them all to you in a bit. But first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our partnership with CapU, as well as the safeguarding that's going on at that campus, safeguarding inclusion, and the community of practice that has started there. So, to begin, the partnership with CapU, we've been co-creating inclusive post-secondary education since fall 2021. One student has graduated from CapU with our support, and three students are currently attending CapU with the support of an inclusion facilitator. Students who we've supported at CapU have studied a variety of topics from early childhood education, music, sociology, acting, and languages. And the MOU that we've created with CapU supports access to opportunities and student services that are available to all CapU students, such as advising, counseling, career resources, and student life. There's also opportunities for students we support there to access cohort programs, practicum opportunities, and to cross the stage with their classmates when their program has completed. Um, to talk a bit about the safeguarding that goes on at this campus. Um, when an initiative is embedded, facilitators build relationships with members of the campus community, and those relationships with allies lead to opening up opportunities for students, such as like new areas of study, practicum opportunities, work on campus, and changing necessary campus practices that seek to exclude or act as barriers to the students who we support, such as course enrollment and course registration and access to student resources like student union and the academic advising area. So we work with the allies that we build on campus to provide access to the students who we support like any other student would have. When an initiative is safeguarded, facilitators aim to build the capacity of the community to do the work of moving inclusion forward on their own. So, allies start to understand the guiding principles of inclusive post-secondary education and adopt inclusion as a value on campus. This will look like members of the campus community using their connections and resources to move inclusion forward, to gather new allies, change systems when students face barriers to access, and provide educational or work opportunities to the students who we support, with the understanding that there are barriers to access for the students who we support, such as competitive employment practices, and competitive application processes that can be made more accessible by understanding those barriers. At CapU, we've also started to develop what's called the community of practice. The community of practice is formed by a group of professionals or members of a community who have a shared interest or concern. So, in this case, inclusion on campus. Um, those individuals will come together to work on goals in their area and larger goals that impact the entire campus. So, goals about inclusion and access in their area, and then larger goals about making people aware of the initiative on campus and the movement of inclusion in general. Um, these communities of practice focus on sharing best practices and knowledge, as well as brainstorming and using their pooled resources to work to move towards a goal, such as supporting a student who attends university through this inclusive partnership to attend a practicum or to find work after graduation. Bringing together the members of campus communities, such as administrators, faculty, registrar's office employees, and student affairs employees, can allow everybody to pool their resources together. Um, and then with this community of practice, the focus is on the guiding principles. Um, through the lens of the benchmarks of inclusive post-secondary education. And the themes are based on things that impact all university students. So, of course, career development, enrollment, but also student life and engagement. What do students have access to do on campus, and what are they up to? Um, so that is a bit about the community of practice. I'm going to introduce you all to members of the panel. I have four folks from CapU here today, who I have a few questions for, to talk about what motivates them to include folks, to move inclusion forward on campus, and to talk about why this is important with their colleagues. So I'll introduce to you Brad Martin. Brad is the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Health, and Human Development. Um, I'll introduce Sean Ashley. Sean is the chair of the School of Social Sciences, as well as an instructor of sociology and criminology. Um, Kate Pfeiffer, she's a CapU alum who started working at CapU in 2021, first in university events and now in student affairs. And Janine is the assistant registrar of records and student information. Hello, everybody. So I have four questions for the folks I have featured here today. I'll get started with a question. Um, Question one is that all four of you have very different roles working in different areas of the university. Why is it important for us to come together and talk about inclusion? And what, if anything, do you bring back to your role when we do that? And if it's all right, I'll start with Sean.
Thanks, Ezra. I'm I wear a couple different hats here at Capilano. I'm an instructor in the Department of Sociology and Criminology, as well as the chair of Social Sciences. And I think, one of the important things about coming together and discussing is that, universities are very complex systems now. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things going on. And so I think, particularly speaking as an instructor, you're oftentimes not aware of you're not aware of what students are really doing as they move through the process of registering and going to advising and dealing with all of the kind of processes that the university set out. So I think hearing the challenges that students face and talking to other people is key. And I've definitely seen some of this in my own work with Steps Forward. When I started, I wasn't really aware of how students, for example, were auditing courses, or what that meant, or how they were registering. So I do think it's really important to allow for us to come together and discuss this. And I think CAP's actually really nice in the sense that it's a bit of a smaller school, and we're able to kind of do this a little bit maybe easier than I used to work up at SFU, and I don't know where the registrar's office is, let alone who might might be working there. So I think that's important for instructors to understand those challenges beyond their the limited confines of their own classroom.
If I could have Kate answer next. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks, Ezra, for having me today. Yeah, so my role here at CapU is orientation and transition programming. So we do all the programming for new students when they arrive on campus. So it's really important for us to come together and talk about inclusion, because we want to make sure that when we're planning for orientation, that we're taking that into mind, that not all of our students come in with the same abilities, and how do we ensure that our programming is accessible to all folks that are starting at CAP. And so, really working closely with Ezra and the team from Steps Forward has really been helpful to inform what we're doing and to give us a different lens as we're thinking about the different planning, and to make sure that we don't just create a one size fits all, but we really look at some of the nuances and find, strategic ways to be inclusive, and to make sure that any student that is supported by Forward can feel like they're invited to all the same orientation spaces that all the rest of the CapU students are. So I've learned so much from working with Ezra, and just bringing it into the practice that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the great things about the work you guys are doing in the student life offices. There are people who you may not initially expect to see in university, and you guys do a lot of work to make sure those people have space in university. Janine.
Hi. It's really nice to be back here again for I think it's the second year in a row that I've been to the
Mhm.
symposium. So, this is really exciting for me. So thank you again for having me. In my role as the assistant registrar, I get to do all the fun administrative work. So that's where having all the people steps forward. I know we've worked a lot with Brad and a little bit with Sean. That's where it's understanding all the various areas that touch the students through their process at CAP, understanding with the symposium what challenges students have seen from other institutions as well as at CAP, and identifying possible barriers that we can help remove to make a smoother transition in the administrative process because it's quite a bit of a hurdle for students in general. So for students coming through a awesome program like this where there's support, it's really great to be able to identify not just how we can make it easier for the students, but also for the facilitators to help them move through. So it's really important to have as many people to touch point with in this so that we can keep up to date and address those challenges as quickly as possible.
Yeah, what Janine said about making things more simple for facilitators. Janine's role has been incredibly instrumental in facilitators moving things forward for students. So appreciate you being back here. Brad.
Hi, thanks, Ezra. Hi, everyone. Um, Brad Martin, as Ezra mentioned, and Dean of one of our five faculties here. It may be helpful for folks to know a little bit about the faculty before I jump into answering the question. So, my faculty is Education, Health, and Human Development, which contains our School of Education and Childhood Studies, so our early childhood education and education assistant programs, and then we have a School of Allied Health and a School of Access and Academic Preparation. And for me, becoming involved in the relationship with Steps Forward is an outgrowth of a philosophical orientation that I think is particularly strong in my faculty, but at the institution as a whole. And that has to do with this idea that education is fundamentally for everyone. And we take that very seriously in the faculty and at the institution. Education as a public good that we all benefit from, and everyone has the right uh, to take advantage of. That access sort of mission, that access sort of orientation is really where I come to all of this from. And my role in moving this forward and getting it launched at CapU really I see as connecting us to our values, having conversations at the institution about how partnerships like this are an expression of values that we've all committed to, and I think deeply hold. Sometimes, though, in the day-to-day operation of the university, values aren't always front and center, right? We're trying to get things done, and whether it's for administrative reasons or political reasons or whatever, we're doing things, right? We don't always talk openly about our values. But for me, situating this partnership in that context, in that framework, is part of what I try to do and how I try to get the conversation started. And what it's done for me beyond the project itself is really emphasize the importance of inclusion in everything that we do at the university, in our committee work, in our academic planning, in our decision making of any kind, making sure that we are as inclusive as possible ultimately makes the institution a better place and really connects us to our social purpose, at least as I understand it, in providing that kind of access and building strong communities. I see inclusion really as part of that. So for me, I take away that idea into so many other kind of arenas of my work. How can we center inclusion? How can we make sure everyone is heard and treated equally? It's a value that I think being involved with Steps Forward, it's helped me center it in other parts of my work as well, which is why I think it's so important.
I'm really glad to hear that. Brad has been instrumental in bringing our partnership to CapU and making sure our students are included in areas of study. So thank you for being here as well. The next question that I have for everyone is about in doing the work of moving inclusion forward on campus, challenges of course may arise. Can you give an example of one and how you solved it in your role? And for this question, I'll start with Kate.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Ezra. And I wanted to address this question with actually an opportunity that we had. And one of the things that we do every semester with orientation is we hire orientation leaders. And we happen to connect with Melissa and Ezra early on in the year, and they expressed interest in Soraya, who is one of the students that is supported by Steps Forward, working as an orientation leader. And we had spoken with Ezra and Melissa about what kind of the expectations were. And, we really discovered that we thought this would be a really good fit, and we thought it would be a really great opportunity for that student to be integrated in a working space and to get to experience the excitement and fun of orientation, because she had expressed that something that she always wanted to do was give new students tours around campus. So we wanted to make that happen. But we also wanted to make sure that the whole process was accessible to her, because we do an interview with all our orientation leaders. We do a training, and we knew that could pose some challenges. So we met very closely with Ezra and Melissa to kind of see, how do we navigate this? How do we make sure that she's included and that we walk her through the same process as the other students, but in a way that doesn't trip her up and, really sets her up for success. And so it was a really good opportunity for us to work really closely with Ezra and Melissa and figure out, okay, how do we reshape all of our interview questions so she feels included in the process and still gets that side of things. And we did the interview, and Melissa was there and supported as that was going on. And it was just a really cool process, because then Soraya, the student, got to work alongside the rest of our orientation leaders. She got to be there in the heat of things, greeting and being part of the whole process. And I think that our team learned a lot, our other students learned a lot, and we really enjoyed having her. And I think that's something that we will continue doing.
Yeah, I think one of the things while working with you guys to think about supporting a student in this role was how it was important to you all that despite recognizing the barriers that the student might have to competitive employment, she have the opportunity to participate in all aspects of the hiring process anyway. And I thought that was really incredible that she had the opportunity to do that as well. Um, I will ask Janine the question next about challenges that may arise and how you've solved them.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Kate, for that story. I wasn't aware of that, and that's so great to hear. So thank you. Um, so a big challenge that was faced was the registration process. So the students were rolled into the process as a CapU student, which involved being notified via email of time tickets, so when they could register being available, and then registering in courses. When registering courses, sort of coming up with the barriers of prerequisites, issues like that, where it was required then to touch base with an instructor, get an override, and then be able to register. And then once registered, changing over to that audit status. So students couldn't automatically change to an audit. They had to go to the instructor, get paperwork filled out that was then submitted to our office, and then it was changed over. So it was a lot of putting the onus on the student to communicate the process with their facilitator, as well as navigate through timelines, administrative barriers. So I worked a lot with Ezra on this and identifying the impacts this was having on students and looking at some of the ways that we could improve this. So one big piece we did change is that our communication to students in regards to time ticketing and registration timelines, we now include the inclusion facilitator in that communication so they are aware when the students are notified of these timelines so that they can reach out to their students to find out when their registration timelines are and start planning. They can look at the upcoming schedule with them, determine the courses they need. And in having that information in advance, the facilitators can then reach out to the instructors in regards to having those overrides in place. Because generally, most of the time, the students encounter the prerequisite error because they are in courses that are audit. Even if they have taken the course that's a prerequisite, it doesn't actually show up on their record as being something that meets that prerequisite. So this allowed that all to be in place before the student even tried registering, so they did not encounter those errors. So on registration day, providing instructors and everything was done on time, the students can just go in, register directly in the courses that they need. Finally, the piece of changing to an audit. So we removed, I think it was about this time last year. I think we talked about it this last symposium, was completely removing any sort of administrative paperwork required for audit status, as well as the student needing to do anything on their end. So the system that was worked out now is Ezra or Lake, our new inclusion facilitator, will do this, is just email me directly with the student names and the courses that they need switched over to audit, and then it's just an automatic process done. So in doing so, in doing all this, it just has really helped remove sort of timelines, delay in students being able to register, so that then that may cause issues actually getting into the course. And then just removing the extra step of having that annoying paperwork that nobody likes to do and just being able to quickly and easily flip it over.
I can say in my communication with department divisional assistants and program coordinators that they all appreciate this change, and that students also appreciate this change because it really does make a lot of difference when you have to jump through a lot of administrative hoops to do something that every other student can do quite easily. So thank you, Janine, for taking charge and making that change happen. Brad.
Thanks, Ezra. And thank you, Janine, for Janine and I have worked, quite a bit on this over the last few years, but we also have very different roles. And Janine is very much in the detail and the administrative process side of things, which I'm super grateful for because that's not my comfort zone, and it's not my space, but having people on the ground doing that kind of work who are super committed, like Janine, has made all the difference. So kudos to you, Janine. The challenge, or not even the challenge, that kind of the task that fell to me that I wanted to speak about, is the signing of the original MOU, which was, we're on our second go round now. We've renewed once, if I'm remembering right. But one of the big tasks for me at the outset was to get that MOU signed between Steps Forward and the university. And that wasn't necessarily a challenge, as I say, but it did involve some work. Um, you know, Partnerships like this in some ways face a barrier right off the bat, kind of in the modern context of post-secondary education, in the sense that they are smallish, right? We're working with small numbers of students, at least initially, anyway. They aren't, revenue generating projects. And when you need to get the support of people who generally look through those kind of lenses, student registrations, enrollments, revenue generation, you always have to make a case to go forward with these kind of projects. So that was initially my task. And so working with the vice president at the time, who has to be concerned about how best to use university resources in a time when well, there's never a time when there's enough resources for everything that you want to accomplish. A case always has to be made for any kind of partnership or project that might draw on them. So those conversations at an early stage were my responsibility. And our VPA at the time was very supportive, but still the case had to be made so she in turn could make it to others about why we're doing this and why we're involving administrators and other employees at the university in that. And largely, those conversations were about the sort of thing I mentioned in my first response, the values of the institution. Why do we do what we do? Our social purpose as a university, connecting um, conversations about the partnership to those sorts of values, and then working across the faculties with other deans and directors to help them understand what this was about and why we're getting involved, and just securing that kind of buy-in at the administrative level was, um, it took some time. I worked with Arden and others in ironing out the details of the MOU, but in terms of just that general institutional buy-in, that was my big task at the outset, and we got through it. Generally, people very supportive, but a case always has to be made, and there has to be information shared so people understand what we're stepping into. And then when we renewed, it was a much easier process. But as with anything brand new, it just took some time to get people's heads around it.
Thank you for sharing that, Brad. I didn't work as an inclusion facilitator at CapU until after the first MOU had been signed, so I wasn't aware of the challenges that were initially faced when bringing this um, to the awareness of folks and all the work that you had to have done. So thank you for sharing. Sean, if you could share what a challenge might have been that you faced in moving inclusion forward and how you've solved it.
Yeah, and I'll just say again, if you see noses popping up, I've got my puppy Bismarck here to
Oh no!
work at me with work today.
Very cute.
That's what that is. I guess my challenge goes back to what Kate was talking about actually really at the very start of this question. And I think when I started working with students in the classroom, I don't think I was as aware of the importance of um, inclusion beyond the expectations around, say, an audit grade. Um, and all the other things that were really important that students really wanted, like again, like to complete assignments and and that sort of thing. And so that was a real important moment for me understanding what steps forward was about, what we were striving to do. And so the challenge really arose, I think, within my own department when another instructor didn't really understand that as well. And again, the challenge was around a test. Again, a student wanted to write a test with the class, and the instructor was reluctant to take on that extra work. And so again, I met with the instructor and Ezra and again we tried to figure out how we might might make it so that that student could write with the class, um, a modified test and what that would mean. And unfortunately, that situation we weren't really successful. But I think again, out of that challenge came a much better understanding both of what we need to be communicating to instructors. I mean, Ezra and I have talked about this, that again, it's really important that instructors understand that this is about inclusion. It's not about an audit. It's something much more. And I think going forward, and this kind of goes to the next question, but I'll keep it within the challenges realm, is that I'm gonna be really much more clear with instructors in my own area to say, look, this is what we're really doing here. This is this because again, I think a lot of instructors feel, even though we give a lot of assignments and we give a lot of tests, that in these cases that some of this stuff is not something students want to do, because we get a lot of pushback around, why did I get the grade I did, or can I pass it in late and stuff. And so I think that's really important for me in the future also to communicate And I think, Ezra and I were working on an FAQ. Ezra was working on it. Again, that really kind of captures that, and that aspect of what we're trying to do. Again, just like Kate was saying, again, in terms of the interview questions, that's really important. That's really important part of all of this. So, yeah, that was a challenge I faced. Geez, maybe just this year.
Thank you for sharing, Sean. And I'll say, like, as you said, the instructor in that situation didn't end up working out, and the student wasn't able to write their exam in the classroom. But as a facilitator, I learned so much from you during that experience together, how to better support instructors, think about what they need, and help them prepare for all the ways that they'll need to think about including students in their classroom. So thank you for that. The third question that I have for all of you is about how I've supported you to raise communication or to raise consciousness and communicate with your colleagues about inclusive post-secondary education and how that conversation has gone for you. And for that question, I will start with Janine.
Great. So, I mean, it's no doubt that Ezra is incredibly passionate about the students she works with and what she does. So, asking her to help raise consciousness or support in any way is so easy and so enjoyable to be a part of. So one way I can speak to how Ezra's really helped is she came and spoke at one of the registrar's office meetings to inform the whole department as to the Steps Forward program, how CAP works with that program, and some of the stories of some of the students that we've been lucky enough to have attend our institution. So that was really helpful in just getting everyone, even those that steps may not actually work with or touch necessarily, just everyone up to date with the wonderful program that we work with. Um, she also is quick to set up meetings with various areas, such as for me, touching base with grad, advising, getting us all in a room, making sure that we're up to date with what is going on, and working together to make sure everything's as collaborative and seamless as possible. One of the big impacts that's recently happened that Ezra helped a lot with was getting a Steps Forward webpage built on the Capilano University website. So this mostly was done for students so that they could be aware of this program, how to get in touch, and what it looks like at CapU. But it also had the effect of giving all of that information as well to not just the direct colleagues in the registrar's office I work with every day, but the university community as a whole. So Ezra was instrumental in bringing that idea forward. It was part of the new MOU, so getting that in there and getting that built, and she helped a lot with the content, ensuring that we were addressing what needed to be addressed and that terminology was correct and inclusive to all students. So that was one of the big, most recent collaborations that we had. So, yeah.
Well, definitely don't downplay your participation in getting the webpage up. I definitely couldn't have done it without you. Thank you. Brad, if you could answer next about how I've supported you to raise consciousness and communicate with your colleagues about inclusive post-secondary education. I know you've done a lot of that.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, I would echo a lot of what Janine said about as your role, Ezra, and your kind of uh, personal strengths and capacity to support all of us. But also, I mean, the importance of that role, whoever fills that role, is just very critical. One of my main tasks, as I see it, is to raise the profile of this program and partnership and inclusion generally at the university. And I could not have done that without Ezra feeding me constantly with information, with opportunities to celebrate. So, each of the milestones along the way, whether it was the signing of the first MOU or the re-signing or the entry of any given student into the program, the completion of our one student, um, at each of those moments, that provided me with a way to celebrate and profile what was going on. So whether it's through LinkedIn and social media, whether it's through my weekly or monthly meetings with other senior administrators, whether it's our bi-monthly update to the Board of Governors, in all of those venues, I've got something to share about this program and about inclusion in general. And that, just wouldn't have been possible without Ezra and that role. My role at the university gives me access to people and I have certain networks, but without the information to kind of feed through those things, um, they're not much help, right? So very, very key for sure. And I like to think that all of us collectively have not just raised the profile of this partnership and steps forward, but the idea and the ideal of inclusion as well. I can see a shift in the organization even over a few short years, which is that's a short period of time in terms of shifting institutional culture. But I think we can point to ways in which this has all made a difference, and that all flows back to the information that we all get from Ezra and from Steps Forward.
Oh, Brad, you're gonna make me cry. No, I'm so grateful for being able to work with all of you. And as Brad said, I've seen changes because of connections that you guys have made and conversations that you guys have had in the culture at CapU and the way that CapU values inclusion. So I'm incredibly grateful for all of you being able to work alongside you and the way that you've taken the information I've given you about inclusion and moved it across the campus. Sean, if you could share about how you definitely, especially recently, have definitely gone about raising consciousness with your colleagues and talking about inclusive post-secondary education, if you could share.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we ran into, I guess, I think it was this year, maybe in the fall, was that many of the instructors in arts and sciences really weren't aware of the program. And again, I think people have a different level of comfort when they jump into something new as instructors. I mean, um, I when I first heard about it, I'm like, this sounds great. Other people were like, is this legitimate? I mean, what's going on? So one of the things we did this semester was I have Ezra come in and speak with first we have what's called a faculty council. It's basically all of the department heads and program heads for arts and science. To talk with them about the program, talk with them about the FAQ that was being developed at the time, and I think that's really key. And again, I think if people are working with other institutions, having that presentation and understanding amongst program heads is really key because that's who a lot of the instructors are first going to turn to. They're going to immediately contact their coordinators for their areas. And I also had, because I'm also the chair of social sciences, Ezra came in and spoke with our social science group as a whole, which is all the instructors within the School of Social Sciences. And I think that was really useful as well because then you get the on the ground people and people can again, they'll know when people are approaching them again. Hey, this is something I want to be involved in, and this is something I already know about. Because, as I said, going back to the last question, it is important to understand what the program is about and what we're trying to do um, within the classroom. Outside of, again, is this not, like I said, a normal kind of audit kind of situation. So I think that's really important. And I think one of the other things that came through both of those meetings, and it's related to that understanding, is that discussion around modifications and what that means. And I think, that's a discussion that I've been having more and more with my colleagues. And it's interesting because it's kind of like moving the institution, sort of like what Brad was saying, in another direction. Because for a long time, when we talked about accessibility, we talked about accessibility, access is about, is not really about changing a course. It's about providing people with certain accommodations. Well, that conversation shifted. Now we're talking about modifications. We're talking about changing the course contents and assignments themselves. And I'll say, Ezra, I'm not even sure you know about this. This kind of moved back into how some of the instructors taught their course. So with one of the sociology instructors right now, those kind of modifications are now exist for all of the students. And, you know, he's enjoying having a wide range of different kinds of assignments being produced, you know,
Mhm.
different ways that things are being evaluated. So again, it kind of spread through his whole course experience and how he teaches. So I think that's a really a valuable shift too in terms of how we're thinking about inclusion here, at least within my own area of social sciences.
I want to say I thank you, Sean. And I want to say I think I know who you're talking about. And if I can say, I'm so glad that he has brought that into other areas of his teaching. And it's an incredible instructor. And I'm so glad to have supported a student to work or to study in his classroom. Um, yeah. And also thank you for bringing me into all of the places and knowing when it's important to bring me into a place to talk about inclusion. I appreciate that a lot. Kate, if you can share about, I know that some of your colleagues are students, but and some of your colleagues are not students. If you could share a bit about how you've talked about inclusion in the student life office.
Yeah, well, it's been really great listening to the other panelists talk about their role and how they involve inclusion because we're very different on student life. You know, we're about the fun things and the engagement and the inclusion and the belonging. And so, you know, really when we started working with one of our students that are supported by Steps Forward, that was kind of our introduction. And because it was such a great experience, I think after that, the two inclusion facilitators were in our office all the time because it just raised our whole mindset and thought process, right? Because we do plan a lot of social events. We're the ones that, you know, create these activities for students that are outside of the classrooms that are really supposed to help them feel belonging on campus. And we can't do that without having the lens of inclusion and making sure that everyone can participate and access these. And so both Ezra and the other and Melissa, the other past inclusion facilitator, you know, just spent a lot of time with us to really help us understand the students that they're supporting, but then just overall our whole thinking. And as Ezra mentioned, a lot of our colleagues are students. I have 7 students that I personally manage, and they do a lot of our programming. And so it's really important to also have those conversations with them because there are students that maybe aren't supported by Steps Forward, but have some access needs. And, you know, navigate through university a bit differently. And we want to make sure that they still feel like every space that we are creating and every, you know, event that we are hosting, that they're invited to and that they are part of. And so, you know, having those conversations, Ezra has been so helpful for just like really making sure that we understand and, you know, figuring out different strategies and different ways that we can, you know, just reduce barriers in anything that we're doing and make sure that when we're doing the planning, we're taking that under consideration as well. So it's just been super helpful to have these conversations because I think our intention was there, but we don't necessarily like we don't want to accidentally make mistakes. So we're able to navigate a bit safer by having these conversations.
Yeah. Oh, I will say, spent a ton of time in the student life office, and it's not just because they always have snacks in there. It's because the people um, truly have inclusion at the center of their values, thinking about how students interact with their programming. And I love being around people like that, of course. Um, so for the last question, my favorite question, is about where do you witness inclusion in your role? This conversation has got me a bit grateful and a bit nostalgic thinking about my time working at CapU. So I wanted to briefly share a story of my own witnessing inclusion. Um, as an inclusion facilitator, I was really grateful to have an office space in the Career Resource Center and Advising Office. And one day around the start of when I began working in that area, I was sitting in the office, my door closed, and I overheard a conversation between two academic advisors, one of them asking what is Steps Forward because they saw the sign on the door with my name on it, and the other one saying, Steps Forward is a great initiative, and I can tell you firsthand that the students who are supported by that initiative, um, they contribute and have reciprocal relationships with the campus community. And I cried a little bit, but I also laughed because it really read like something that I've seen on her website before. So I was like, where did this person learn this exact sentence to say? Um, but hearing people talk about inclusion at CapU, I've been so grateful to work on a campus that talks about inclusion that way. So if I can start with Brad, hearing where you witness inclusion in your role as the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Health, and Human Development.
Sure. I mean, I think I am uh, exposed and participate in conversations about inclusion on a fairly regular basis in my role, which in itself is a change. So I've been in this role 8 years now. And over the last couple of years in particular, it's really front and center, the idea of inclusion of a lot of what we do in the faculty. Some of it has to do with the nature of our programming, perhaps. But I also think it has to do with, some of these efforts that we've been talking about today around steps forward. And I mentioned off the top that one of the program areas in my faculty is early childhood education, for whom it is particularly an issue that they wrestle with. Um, the idea of inclusion, but the practice of inclusion as well. And we have made that a priority this year in particular to kind of look at and work through the complexities of in a way that we haven't in the past. Some of you may know that we have a relatively new campus in Squamish. And the very first conference that we held up there was a conference focused on inclusion in the early childhood education sector, which was organized largely in response to, I think, some instances over the last few years where young children and children a little bit older in the public school system who had complex needs of one variety or another were not treated in the way that, perhaps they should have been, and kind of a concern out in the sector about how well we were doing in this space, this aspiration to inclusion. And that was the theme of the conference. And it was a really rich couple of days. As you can imagine, amongst early childhood educators in particular, inclusion is particularly important. It is something that they generally value coming into the field, but it's something they teach in classrooms as well, something that our early childhood education faculty teach an older demographic of student as well. So it's really part of my everyday in some senses. What it's made me think about, though, is the complexities of inclusion, right? Like, I think as a value, most people are, yes, this is a good thing. We need to do this. But there are barriers. There's, kind of reasons for which, our idealized notions of inclusion don't come to pass. And kind of, struggling with the whys and the complexities around inclusion is really part of, what we do in the faculty. So for me, that's a privilege. It's connected with the steps forward conversation, and I often make the connections between what's happening in ECCE and kind of what's happening in steps forward. But it's a very kind of live thing in the faculty. So, and that's a change, a positive one, I think.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. As Brad of course knows, but I've, as an inclusion facilitator, supported a student to take courses in early childhood education when I was a facilitator at CapU, and she shared about how um, her experiences being excluded in her earlier years in school brought a lot to conversations that she was having with her classmates and with her instructors in those classrooms, talking about pedagogy, talking about exclusion in early childhood care. Her own experiences brought a lot to the table, and so I appreciate that she was um, empowered to have those conversations, and that's a value of that. Um, that's a value of that faculty. Um, Sean, if you could share how you witness inclusion come about in your role.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to talk to is actually about the is the way the students work to include other students in the classroom, and I should even say instructors. I mean, a classroom is very much I mean, not to sound too sociological, but it's very much a performance, where everybody's playing certain roles and they want everyone to succeed. And I know when I started out as an instructor, I was really terrified. I had a lot of stage fright. And I was just amazed at how forgiving and supportive students are. And that's something I've also seen in the classroom as well. I've seen, with working with, well, one of the students that Ezra supported, for example, how much the classroom, how much the students in the classroom would also support that student to make space, to make sure they felt included. And I think that this happens quite a lot. Like when I've spoken to other instructors, when I hear all these challenges that, whatever that they're dealing with, it's never about the students, the others, it's never about the classroom and the students themselves. It's that I really think that students are in by and large, very, very supportive of Ezra and wants inclusion and wants the program in their classrooms. And so I think maybe this is particularly maybe the case in situations like sociology classes where we are talking about inclusion and diversity. But I think again, in a bigger picture, it's also that idea that students want a whole class, like the whole course, to be success. And that's again something I'm going to be speaking to, with other instructors as they kind of take part in the program, to say, look, you gotta, don't worry so much about your others, what's going to happen in the classroom. The students themselves are going to work for inclusion. And that's again something I've seen again and again in a lot of different situations, and it's really nice to see that. And as I said, I feel it also as an instructor when I was, terrified, and the students felt like, like, come on, we can do this, kind of approach to it. So, yeah, that's a place I really, yeah, have really witnessed inclusion is not just with instructors, but also the students themselves.
Thank you for sharing. Um, Kate, if you could share where you witness inclusion in your role, especially given that your role is working so closely with students.
Yeah, I was just kind of almost echo what Sean was saying. I think that's one of the coolest things to see is how adaptable both our student staff are and just other students happen to be. We hold an event every single Wednesday, which is entitled Wellness Wednesday, and this is just from different crafting to sometimes it's trivia. It's all different activities, and we get a lot of different students, and quite often we find that this is a place where students with some different access needs tend to hang out because they feel safe in these spaces. And so it's really awesome to watch our student staff kind of learn how to react and learn how to figure out different methods and different strategies to include these students. And one of the stories I love to tell is near Halloween, we always do a haunted house. And this past year, we did a haunted house and in the cafeteria. And, for a lot of folks that are new to Canada, even maybe they've never even got to experience a haunted house. And it came to our attention that one of the students that is supported by Steps Forward was attending the haunted house, and they got to invite one of their friends that they had made to come and be a part of that. And that was really special for us, just knowing that there was programming on campus that maybe the student never could have attended in a public haunted house or gone to somewhere external, but because it was in this environment and because we could react and help out, they were able to take part in it. And so yeah, just going back to what Sean said, it's really watching how the students are so adaptable to changing what they're doing to make sure that any student can feel included and not making it awkward or not making it uncomfortable for everyone, but just, tailoring things a little bit and then also asking for help and knowing that we have the facilitators so accessible to us. we know that if our students run into any barriers, they'll maybe first come to us, but then we can go straight to the facilitators and say, okay, how do we make sure that we prepare our students to interact and to support these other students in the best way?
Thank you for sharing that story. I also participated in the haunted house alongside Emily, who's the regional coordinator here at Steps. And I can say personally, it was very spooky, but also very inclusive. Um, finally, I'll ask Janine to share. Janine, I know your role is different in that you're seeing systems change and less seeing people change, but I think you've also seen systems change to be more inclusive of the students who we support. So if you could share where you see inclusion happening in your role, that would be awesome.
Sure, yeah, that is true. I don't really see the effects of my efforts in regards to students or how it really affects the staff with the changes. So it's awesome to hear all of the personal stories shared by Brad, Sean, and Kate. Um, I'm really lucky, though, in that my team oversees the main contact points of the university, so the front counter and the phones. So I witness daily amazing staff that goes above and beyond to ensure that not just the steps forward program, but all areas and programs within the institution and all individual students do feel included, that it is one community, that everyone is welcome, and that we will do whatever we can to provide an atmosphere that they can grow and thrive in. This really supports in my work in that they identify challenges as they come up and are really passionate themselves in coming up with solutions on how we can create more inclusion. So I'm inspired daily by them, and my staff strive to be inclusive with all of our students. So that's really where I see it um, coming back. Um, yeah, most of mine that I see is the administrative inclusion. But it's nice to, as we talked about earlier with like the registration process, is hearing from Ezra as to how that does impact students directly and taking that direct feedback and working towards ensuring our systems processes are inclusive has been really rewarding.
Thank you, Janine. And I can say I've supported many students to use the registrar's office desk for various things. And I've also been in the background while students who I support use the resources at that desk without my support. And every time I've been glad to see that folks who work at the registrar's office desk are intuitive and willing to listen and willing to figure out what the problem is. Thank you for providing that opportunity or for providing that experience and that expectation for your staff. That's all the questions that I have for our panelists. I'm so grateful to, like I said, have had the opportunity to work alongside the four of you while I was a facilitator at CapU, and I'm so excited to see how the four of you will move inclusion forward continually now that I'm not in that role anymore. And I'll, of course, still stick around because I love the CapU campus community so much. But thank you for participating today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Ezra.
Thank
Yeah.
you.